Thanks.
Good morning. We have a special guest with us today, Isabella Young. She's got a background that a lot of people here may wonder why we're talking about such things, but we all have these belief systems that make ourselves vulnerable. And when we look at chronic illness, our belief systems keep us entrapped into, we'll get into cultic systems that can never give us the answer that we're looking for. And it's not until we really begin to deal with those belief systems that we're actually going to find what we're looking for. So this is Your Health Reclaimed, where we expose the roots of chronic illness, Lyme disease, so that people can finally heal. It's the root issues that give us the insight into what's really going on. And this is an aspect that's just not talked about very often. Certainly not enough. It's one of the core issues that keeps us all in the bondage that doesn't allow us a rich and fulfilling life. So welcome to the show, Isabella. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dr. Brad, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a guest on your podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation. My name is Isabella Young, and I grew up in Australia and left Australia in 2000, and I thought I was joining a spiritual group and pursuing my spiritual evolution, which has been a passion of mine since I overcome my atheism. Anyway, that was not what was happening. I actually ended up in a cult and married to the cult leader. And he has, after about 8 years of living hell for all of us, we had a daughter together, and that kind of kept me trapped in the cult in a very material way. And I didn't know I was in a cult, and I knew I was in hell, and I didn't really know how to get out. And after 8 years, my son was found dead behind the house, and that was framed as a murder. As a suicide, but since come to find out that he was actually murdered. Allegedly, I'm supposed to say that, in order to keep the fact that the cult leader was a pedophile, and a rapist, and a con man, to keep that secret. So anyway, that broke me out of my thought patterns, my belief systems, and that enabled me to recognize what was going on around me, because I was really ignorant of the truth. And then once I recognized that I was in a cult, I eventually escaped and came to Hawaii, when I could then calm my nervous system down and spend a lot of time in nature and connect to the earth, which has been my most powerful healing modality. And then I was able to see more clearly what situation I was in, and then understand how I got into that situation, and then went on from there to continue healing.
It's interesting. You started to realize you were in a system that wasn't good and healthy while you were still in it, but it wasn't until you got out of it you began to understand a lot of how it worked. Did I catch that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, there was sometimes in the cult we would joke about being the cult that wasn't a cult, because there are a lot of people, like this cult leader claims to be the second coming, the Messiah, the Kalki Avatar, the one who's come to save humanity. And there are a lot of people making that claim. He's not the first person to make that claim. So that was sort of joked about, that he was the real one, and all these other ones were just, fake cult leaders.
It's interesting to me how they work. And there's this narcissistic pattern that we tend to get groomed into believing things that are not really true.
Right.
The idea of someone being a Messiah is such a narcissistic claim of, look at me, I am God. And with the narcissistic claim and the fallen nature, it allows you to justify everything that goes on because you're pleasing me, the God of me. And my wife and I, we both had just way too much in our lives of narcissistic relationships and all that. And we've tried to come up with some really good ways to be able to recognize who they are before you get entrapped and entangled in their webs. And that's really what they are. The Bible talks about a lot of relationships being like spider webs. They look like they have strength, but as soon as you put any pressure, they just break and they allow you to fall and crash rather than be a net where there's safety and protection and all that. Narcissistic issues are completely the opposite of that. And one of the things that we've come up with that really seems to reveal one is to see how they are with babies. They're always uncomfortable around babies because the baby demands attention to be put on them. And a narcissist can't stand for attention to be on anyone other themselves. Can you think of anything that's more revealing than that?
No, I like that. That one I heard was to watch how they treat people who they think are less than them, like people who waitresses and waiters, like food service staff or flight attendants or whatever. Just watch how they treat people who they don't believe necessarily are going to give them anything, or and then they'll switch when they think they can get something from someone. But I like the babies. I think that would, although they're so good at acting. In fact, this guy, the cult leader, was actually a trained actor. And there's been quite a few cult leaders who've come out of acting, because that's what they're doing. They're acting.
I know a
They're putting on
minister who came out of acting, and he was quite theatrical in his sermons. But it's interesting to me. I've been in ministry doing pretty deep theological studies for decades, and I traveled all over the world doing ministry. It's always interesting to me to see where people go wrong with foundations. And I believe it was a messianic cult that you were in, correct?
Correct.
And there's a basic tenet of manipulation in virtually all of the messianic people that I see, in that they try and recreate a system of law as their access to grace, rather than grace being what it really is, and create a whole system of adherence through these legalistic edicts that always tend to be self-serving to someone else, and they seem to have an elevated position as if they are better
Yeah.
than all other peoples. You have the same experience.
Yeah, I do have this same experience with like that cult leader wasn't the last relationship I had with a narcissist, and I could see the same patterns of behavior in terms of how they elevated themselves above other people, expect special treatment. They're the arbitrator of truth. They can do no wrong. They have no empathy, no ability to empathize, and no ability to self-reflect, which makes them almost irredeemable, because if you haven't got any ability to, look at yourself and think, well, perhaps I could have done this better, or not said that, or whatever, then there's really no hope for any type of healing. I have heard that there have been some people with a narcissistic personality disorder that do heal from that, but it's pretty rare because, like I said, there's no ability to self-reflect.
It's interesting you say they don't have the ability to empathize, though it's empathetic people, the empaths, that their primary targets are.
Yeah,
Which,
it's a perfect relationship. This is something that I came to understand about the whole narcissistic personality disorder, because it was all well and good for me to point the finger at him and says he has a narcissistic personality disorder. Like, clearly he thinks he's God in human form. But what did that mean about me, that I would get into a relationship and then stay in the relationship? What's my problem, basically? And what I came to understand was narcissistic personality. What I learned was that I had what some people call codependent tendencies. So I have the tendency to look outside myself for approval and appreciation, and I get my needs met from other people that way. So both narcissistic personality disorder and codependency have the same, from the same root, which is lack of self-love. Only the narcissist is creating a person to get what they need from other people, and I'm just out there just being needy and trying to get my whatever I need from other people. But both stem from self-love deficit. I can't take credit. Dr. Sam Vaknin writes and talks about that extensively. And so once I realized that, then I knew that how I was going to protect myself from further narcissistic abuse and heal from my experiences, and also just like stop suffering, was to love myself, learn to love myself, practice self-love. And that's still a work in progress, because if that's not established in childhood, that's a lot of work's got to go into building self-love.
Well, the idea of codependency and self-love are very interesting concepts, because we're designed to get a fair amount of our self-worth from our interaction of others. Women, in their sense, they get a lot of their valuation by how they're treated and how they're interacted with. I remember a story of a guy who lived in some island culture, and I don't know if I ever heard of where that culture was. It was like Indonesia, Philippines, something, where there's chains of islands and all that. And this guy that was more of a merchant came to this island, and he sees this guy who has a daughter that he's interested in marrying. And they did dowries there, and it was a big thing. Dowries was dependent on what somebody thought the woman was worth. And big dowry was like one cow. Oftentimes it was something small for what the father thought of his daughter was something he didn't expect at all. And this merchant gave him a dowry of 5 cows. Floored him and everybody else around. Somebody from the island where the daughter came from came and visited the guy sometime later. This very gracious woman meets him at the door, invites him in, very gracious in interacting. She's just striking in all of the interaction. And she brings him into the presence of the merchant, and she excuses herself, and she leaves the room, and the guy asks, so where was, that whoever met me at the door, that's just an amazing person. Where's the woman that you paid the 5 cows for? He said, she's the one that met you at the door and let you in. He goes, what? What are you talking about? That woman was elegant with all these graces. He goes, yes. And the guy's looking at him, and he's asking some things. He says, I saw her value. That's why I paid 5 cows. She just needed the right healthy relationship to bring her out into who she's supposed to be. And that's how God made us, in a sense. But it's important for the foundation of that relationship to be healthy, not self-serving, but self-sacrificing to the betterment of the other. It's the total opposite of narcissistic issues, where you sacrifice your own self to the betterment of those in your family.
Yes, that's the ideal.
And our true self-worth, it does come from God. He's the only one who values us for who we really say that, well, he made every one of us for specific purposes. And it's only when we come to know him in an intimate way that he can reveal what those are and direct our lives, so we actually become who he designed us to be. And that's where we have the greatest worth.
Right, when we become servants. offer our life in service to the divine.
It's totally transforming
Mm.
to do that. I've got
Yeah.
30 years of prison ministry, and every time the inmates would act up about how bad their upbringing was, I'd just talk for a short bit about my own, and it never failed to shut a prison up. Mine was worse than theirs, and they realized I didn't live there. And it puzzled them for a couple things. One, I chose to not live there, and two, it obviously didn't impact my life, and I was an example to them that if they let go of that same type of stuff, they could have a completely different life too.
Right. If they, yeah, we're talking about belief systems, that it really, a lot of the work major work that I did in my healing process was to examine my belief systems about myself that were established in childhood. And I'm sure there's if you've been working with people who have run up against the law, then usually their belief systems about themselves are way off, in terms of their value, their worth, their purpose. So I went through my belief systems, like what do I believe about myself? And I found out I didn't feel like I was worthy. I didn't feel like I was lovable, and then had to reprogram basically those false and limiting beliefs. And it was,
And
then I could start moving forward.
how did that process start and actually work its way through you? Because I'm going to preface this with this, is I see people stuck in cultic systems of healthcare to
Yeah.
keep them in the same kind of bondage that what you're talking about. And it's not until their eyes get open and they start to deal with their belief system they can step out of those cultic relationships and actually find some healing.
Right. Well, I think the first step is to accept the fact that what you believe may not be true. What you believe about yourself might not be true. What you believe about the world around, that what's really going on. Are you trusting that government's here to serve us? Are you trusting that Western medicine's got the answers for your health problems? And to be really honest about that, and to be open to the fact that maybe most of the things you believe could be lies. And I think that's where I had to start, was right from the bottom. What did I believe about myself? I didn't love myself, so then I had to learn to love myself. I also had to find what my purpose was again after getting out of the cult. I didn't really know who I was, and I certainly didn't know what I was supposed to be doing after that, except recovering. So it takes the willingness and courage, really, to start off by examining your belief systems about yourself, nature, food, work, all that, to really examine what is true. And it's getting more and more difficult to do that, because it does require some research, some study, and the sources available for us to do that now, while they seem to be extensive because of the internet, that's also what's happening is there's like algorithms are making searches for that type of information more difficult, and then AI is changing the truth on things. Very challenging to actually want to do this type of work and this healing, and there's not many people who are really up for that task, because it isn't easy and it isn't really fun. If you start to ask some serious questions, like what is really going on in the world? Why does it seem like everything's getting more crazy and there's more chaos and so many people are suffering? To ask the hard questions.
You reminded me, I got in Eastern Europe and Russia as the Berlin Wall was coming down the first time, and went back more times after that. But I learned something over there. Actually, it was a second trip in the middle of, literally in the middle of Siberia. It was a 5-day trip on the Trans-Siberian Railway, one way, to get to where we went. And the thing that I learned there was really eye-opening. That was back, I think, in 1991. The Berlin Wall come down in 89, and we went through Checkpoint Charlie on day 3, going in there. What I learned in the second trip was that America had the most well-oiled propaganda machine in the world. And it primarily used the media, which was mostly TV, to promote all their mistruths. Hitler, he directed his machine in a very interesting way. And he says, you don't want to tell outright lies. You want to give half-truths, but you want to mix that with our agenda.
Yeah.
And if we tell people that often enough, they'll believe it.
Yeah, that's brainwashing.
It pretty much is, but our governments do that. The media does that. In America, you got the same three groups that own virtually all of your media.
Yeah. All of it.
Israel just bought TikTok, and they bought it for an agenda.
Yeah.
And they're manipulating things as far as that goes. And all these belief systems are infiltrated in everything that we're confronted with and exposed to everywhere in life. It's not that I have some lies I believe in. We're just bombarded with them.
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult thing to come to grips with that, because it's until you come to grips with that, you can't even begin to find the answer, can you?
No, you can't. Because if you can't see that there's a cage for consciousness or a perception deception, or that there's this, mind controlling enterprise going on, behavior controlling, society controlling, if you can't recognize that, just like I couldn't recognize that I was in a cult, then there's no way that you can escape. If you don't recognize that you're in a cage, you can't be free. So it's important that's an important first step too, is to recognize that there's a lot of shenanigans going on. And from my understanding, any mainstream media is government propaganda, all of it, all the time. And those systems that operate in collusion to basically keep us ignorant include the government, the media, the legal system, the religions, the Western medicine. There's these systems that operate in as a team almost to keep people controlled and living this, serving the master 9 to 5, paying taxes, only got the weekends free. We're not really free. That whole living in the land of the free is an absolute joke, because this is not the way that people live generally, unless it's an indigenous society, is not a free society. It might look like it, but it's not.
Last year, I went to Australia the first time to go work with somebody out there, and they almost didn't let me in the country.
Oh, yeah, you're dangerous.
I got tied up in customs. They want you to declare if you got any medicines. I had some natural things, but I was the first one out of the plane. I didn't have any It didn't have any stowed luggage, so it was just carry on. First one in customs. They emptied my plane, I think the next plane, and I was the last person out of the second plane, out of customs. They ripped on, all I had was a small little backpack. Small. Things like kids would carry their school books in. That's all I had. There wasn't that much to go through. She ripped it apart and she's accused me of trying to smuggle marijuana. And it's like, you look at the color of my hair. I'm not the age that people do that. It's just ridiculous. But people think Australia's a free land. No, it's not. We're going to cut this one short here. This is getting a little bit long, and we will continue this in the next session. So tune in next time to hear the conclusion.